I'm Daniel Vigil. I'm from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I manage the Marijuana Health Monitoring and Research Program there. So our primary focus is on reviewing the scientific literature on health effects of marijuana, which currently doesn't include potential therapeutic benefits. Our focus is on public health, and that's sort of out of our purview, but I do have a lot of awareness of what's out there, and I'm going to share some overviews with you today. We also monitor the marijuana use statistics in Colorado and healthcare encounters with mention of marijuana. And then we have currently 16 research grants that we've been able to provide, and we administer those. And I'll tell you a little bit about those today as well. So I actually kind of want to survey the room quickly. How many people from Colorado? Okay, cool. East, west? Okay, cool.
Wait, were you talking Colorado?
No, sorry. Eastern parts of the United States, western parts, middle? Okay, great, thank you. Well, for those of you from out of state, welcome. You got our snow. Yeah. And any physicians in the room? No? Okay. So patients, family, caregivers primarily? Okay. Do you guys mind throwing out just a few things that you hope to find out today? Anyone? Or you just don't quite know? I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions come up as we go. So here, yes?
No, I'm curious on, I know there's been some research on cancer and marijuana, and that's kind of what I was hoping maybe there might be some of that in their medical marijuana research.
Yep, okay, yeah.
It just got legalized in Pennsylvania. I have a medical marijuana card, and we just can't get anything we want in Pennsylvania. So it's
Really?
It's ridiculous. Everyone's out
Wow.
of stock. But I guess for me, kind of like the anxiety with cancer, it's like these other things, to see where the medical marijuana might work.
Yeah.
So not so much on does it work to cure my cancer?
Mhm.
Maybe. I doubt it, but it's these other, the more like the human side of your cancer. You're like,
Sure.
okay, this is kind of really stressful for me right now. Does this make sense?
Right.
I'm not in any pain. I don't think many of our patients are in pain from their cancer. Like maybe after you had surgery, you might be in a little bit of pain, but this isn't like other cancers where it's like long-term pain.
Yeah.
So it'd just be interesting to kind of see, I think, mentally for us where this might work.
Right, absolutely, okay. Thank you. Yes?
And then I think on the flip side of that, like where are there potential health risks? I see your last point, like where
Yeah.
work in marijuana is harmful to people with cancer, or people in general, but especially for people with cancer.
Absolutely, yeah. And you, sir?
Kind of the same thing,
Okay.
unintended things that might happen.
Right. Okay, great. And as I think there are some things that aren't in my slides that I'll try to make sure to cover, but absolutely throw out questions, even as we go, that's fine. I'd rather answer your questions than have you try to remember them all the way to the end. Rough outline, cannabinoids in the human body, medical and retail cannabis legalization, tell you a little bit about the CDPHE's overall purview related to marijuana, kind of the state of marijuana use these days, then some research on medical benefits and potential health risks. So anyone heard of the endocannabinoid system? There have been two primary receptors located, or identified, I should say, in the human body. The CB1 receptor is located mostly in the brain and the nervous system, and some of the effects of CB1 receptor activation are reducing stress, the stress response and anxiety, increasing appetite, reducing arousal and helping sleep, and then a number of other effects. The CB2 receptors are located primarily in the immune system, and one of the most relevant effects there is reducing cytokine production, which is both pro-inflammatory and is part of the pain process. So they help to modulate pain. And they are kind of less clear than CB1. So the transmitters, don't worry, this is not going to be a super technical presentation. The transmitters actually come from the postsynaptic cell. So there's a cell that sends a message to the next cell, these little triangles, and the cannabinoids actually regulate back on the first cell and primarily regulate back to reduce the excitability, to reduce the amount of signal that it's giving. So in general, they kind of have a calming effect on the transmission of nerve impulses. So two primary cannabinoids. Endogenous just means natural to the human body. They're anandamide, which primarily activates the CB1 receptors, and then 2-AG activates both types of receptors. It's interesting that these are a very local sort of a function. They're not a hormone that gets released throughout the entire body. They just excuse me, they just have this very local effect. So calling it a system may not be exactly accurate, maybe more a series of local feedback mechanisms. And then when you use cannabis, you're putting this transmitter that emulates some of these actions in the entire body, and so that's going to be different than what it looks like naturally. This is a picture of the cannabis plant with, I forget what type of special lens, but it shows all these little crystals all over the leaves and especially on the flowers. Those crystals are the trichomes that contain the cannabinoids. The two main cannabinoids that you'll hear about are THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD, cannabidiol. There are many others, but these are the primary ones that are discussed and that we understand some of effects about. They do not act exclusively at one receptor or the other, so we can't make a specific link between the CB1 and CB2 or the natural cannabinoids. These aren't exact mimics of those. They sort of have overall effects in that endocannabinoid system. So I'll just quickly kind of tell you the Colorado story. In 2000, we legalized the medical use of cannabis. There were less than 2,000 cardholders for the first 7 years. In Colorado, they have to renew their medical marijuana card annually. And that changed when the federal government put out the Ogden Memorandum in 2009, which basically said the federal government was going to be more hands-off, and it sort of gave a green light to being able to openly sell marijuana products. So in Colorado, that meant that dispensaries opened. And in response to that, we increased to over 100,000 cardholders in 2010. This is just a graph of that increase. It has remained pretty steady around 110,000 since that time. And then in October of 2012, our Amendment 64 legalized retail marijuana. I think a lot of voters had this sort of an image in mind that, okay, we're going to let people legally grow some marijuana, maybe share it with some friends, and it is a billion-dollar industry. So the shops opened on January 1st, 2014, and there has been a steady increase in sales. Now, I think that the majority of this has been just a transfer from an illegal market to the legal market, because we haven't seen increases in use among adults or adolescents. And it doesn't appear that there's an increase in amount of use among users either. Just a few very quick points on all the statistics things. I have loads of graphs and everything that I'm not going to burden you with today. But so about 14% of all adults in Colorado are current users, meaning sometime in the past 30 days. 1 in 8 18 to 25-year-olds use daily or near daily. Many adults use 3 or more times per day. And the top reasons for use are sleep, anxiety, and to feel good. High school juniors and seniors, about 1 in 4 are current users. And then smoking remains the most common method of use by far. I threw one slide in here on daily or near daily marijuana use by age group. So I mentioned about 1 in 8 of 18 to 25-year-olds use daily or near daily. Those numbers decrease as in older age groups, but we have seen an increase in the 65 plus daily or near daily marijuana use from less than 1% to between 1 and 2%. The others, oh, I'm sorry, these are the 2014, 2015, and 2016. So in the other age groups, that use has been pretty steady.
And I'm sorry, going back on that other graph, you didn't know like what they were before legalization, right? Were those statistics kept?
No, not on this survey. So that's a good question. 2014 was the first year that this survey asked adults about marijuana use, which is unfortunate. It would have been great to have earlier information. We do have a smaller survey that's done nationally. It's more for a national picture, so it's not quite as reliable for state numbers, but they're, excuse me, that has really sort of supported these numbers in terms of not seeing an increase, in particular since legalization. So, this is a quick map. This is from 2017, so I know there's been a little bit of shift since then. But the green states are states with legal retail cannabis: Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, California, California, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Maine. The yellow states have full medical legalized, meaning CBD or THC containing products. Arizona, New Mexico, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Arkansas, and Florida. And then there are another group of states, mostly in the South, but including Utah, Wyoming, Iowa, and Missouri, with CBD only. And still a few states where it is not, where nothing is legal. Anyone who can't see their state here and is curious, I'm sure you know. You're from the state. And there remains a lot of controversy still about the true effects of marijuana, from it's saving people's lives to it's bad for you, and some say it can even kill you. So, any questions on any of that stuff so far? Okay. So, other than the hair, I think this is a decent likeness here. I mentioned I'm from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I'm a preventive medicine physician, and I actually started at the health department during my residency, working on reviewing literature on marijuana health effects, and ended up later managing the program that I managed. So my program's focus is this number 2, health monitoring and research, but the department also houses the medical marijuana registry. We have a large marijuana education and youth prevention program. Our laboratory just got funded last year for being the reference lab for marijuana in Colorado. That was a real big challenge for a number of years because there was not a reference lab. And then various consultations with edible safety, waste disposal, other departments that end up having some involvement related to marijuana or cannabis. I say marijuana a lot because the the legislation says marijuana, so that tends to be the language that we use in our publications and things. Some people prefer cannabis. It's really equivalent. Same thing. Some people prefer yes.
So, what is the difference in Colorado for if you want medical marijuana or recreational marijuana? And does it be associated with the medical marijuana one? Like, Pennsylvania only has medical. So what is the difference and why would someone, if you have a medical condition, would you just not register for the medical marijuana registry? Just like go about getting it?
Yeah, so the differences are that there is a fee for the medical marijuana card. It's an annual fee. It's only $20, but you have to submit an application and get a card. And then the dispensaries remain separate. There are some locations where they have both, but they are in separated rooms. And one of the biggest differences is that the taxes are much lower on the medical side. And one other small difference is that on edible products, on the retail side, there is a serving size limit of 10 milligrams of THC and a package limit of 100 milligrams. There are no such limits on the medical side because many medical patients use much larger amounts.
Are the products exactly the same?
They are pretty much exactly the same. Clearly there'll be some products, for example, that have higher amounts of THC that might have a different name and wouldn't be available on the retail side. But for the most part, you can get the exact same products in both systems. Yes?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the medical side was more CBD.
That's a common perception,
Yeah.
and it isn't really. In fact, the true CBD-only products are not in the medical marijuana system because they don't count as marijuana. Yeah, so if it's less than 0.3% THC, then it can be sold outside of the system. You can even get it on the internet. And on both sides, you can get a variety of mixes of THC and CBD. So today, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the registry and some of the information from my program. As far as, excuse me, I was sick a couple weeks ago, still have a bit of a cough. So the registry, of course, was established in 2000 when medical marijuana was legalized. They provide the cards, and these first the first 8 conditions were on that initial legislation, and then the final PTSD was added just last year by the legislature. These conditions were glaucoma, cancer, HIV/AIDS, severe pain, cachexia, severe nausea, seizures, and persistent muscle spasms. What's it?
Mickey Mouse is the caregiver.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Caregiver for Donald Duck. Yep. So the vast majority of our patients are over 21 and in the sort of 21 to 60 age range. That's kind of represents the population. There are 17,000 medical card holders, 61 and over. For all ages except 10 and younger, severe pain is by far the most common reason given for having a medical marijuana card. Oh, and just quickly, this for ages 18 to 20, those individuals can't buy on the retail side. It's only 21 and over, but they can get a medical marijuana card with a single recommendation from a physician. For 17 and younger, they need 2 physicians to recommend a card and their parents' authorization. So as I mentioned, severe pain is by far the most common reason for getting medical marijuana cards. Some patients have multiple reasons, so this adds up to more than 100%, but 93% say that they put severe pain on their applications. 30% muscle spasms, 13% severe nausea, and then much smaller numbers for PTSD, cancer, seizures, glaucoma, and cachexia, which is muscle wasting related to disease. So my program specifically, as I mentioned, we review the research literature on health effects of marijuana, we monitor the data, and then we administer some research grants. I'll tell you a little bit more about the first and the third. For the literature reviews and the data, we have this very large report that is also available online. You can go to this website and by chapter look at different things, either the data chapters or the literature reviews by topic. And I'll share this presentation so that hopefully it can get sent to you so you don't have to write all these things down. But if you want to check it out right away, actually, the easiest thing I think is just to use Google to look for Monitoring Marijuana Colorado. So I guess the first thing that it's going to come up sometime, so I'll just address it right away. Those conditions on the initial amendment were not necessarily based on scientific evidence. They were essentially selected by voters, and only some of them have scientific evidence. So glaucoma, there is not much evidence for. What is suggested is that it can reduce pressure in the eye, so that could potentially be a benefit. Okay, so this is more, there we go, one of the pictures. This is more just sort of for general interest. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but there are 4 major methods of use. Smoking, as I said, remains the most common. These are a lot of different terms that are related to that. This is the marijuana flower, that top part that has the highest concentration of cannabinoids. And this is called keef. It's if somebody actually kind of strips off all those cannabinoids, it's more concentrated, but it's just sort of a physically stripped off concentration. There are other methods that are able to get much greater concentrations. So smoking, pipes, people can also use a bong. These are various terms for different types of cannabis cigarettes. Vaporizing is a device that heats the usually an oil, a concentrated oil that not to the point of combustion, but just below, so that it creates a vapor and can be inhaled. And they come in all different shapes and sizes. Excuse me. There are a wide variety of edibles available. Currently in Colorado, there are more limitations than there were initially. I mean, there used to be all sorts of things, peach rings and barbecue sauce and all types of things. It's a little bit more limited these days, but you can get sodas, chocolate bars, cookies, chews, brownies, all sorts of things. And again, on the retail side, 10 milligram serving size limit of THC. The edibles, the cannabinoid content is primarily from an oil or a butter that's made via concentration process.
I have a question.
Yes.
So are all these regulated then by your state? Like, this cookie, like, is someone testing it? Like, does it get tested to make sure what they're saying they are, since it is a regulated state?
Yes.
We don't have edibles in Pennsylvania either.
Oh, okay.
We're not allowed- and it doesn't,
Uh-huh.
I guess I was trying to understand, like, this seems to make sense to me, but
Yeah.
they're all regulated, like, someone's testing to make sure that's exactly what it is when it's in the store.
Correct, yes. So all products from flower to edibles have to be tested by a certified lab. And the labs have to be authorized, and you know, they get checked to confirm that they're testing accurately by that reference lab I mentioned. So yeah, all products have to be tested a certain amount of every batch, and that can change depending on how well you've passed in the past. You can get your testing frequency reduced somewhat, et cetera. But all products are tested for THC content, THC and CBD content, and potential biological contaminants, residual solvents for those that used a concentrate, and we're working on pesticides. It's a very challenging issue because you have to know exactly which to test for. It's difficult for labs to qualify for that. And so, yeah, you're welcome. And then dabbing. So dabbing is a somewhat newer form of use. It is a way of getting a very large dose of cannabinoids quickly. The concentration process can give you a variety of different consistencies, sort of from oil to something that is kind of like a peanut brittle consistency. This is more of a waxy consistency, but they all have in common that they have a high concentration of, usually of THC, because THC is the psychoactive cannabinoid that gets people high, and typically people are looking for, you know, getting the high that they want from this method, although it could be used for CBD theoretically. So there's this nail that is superheated, usually using like a creme brulee torch, and then they take one of these little dabbers and put a small amount of the concentrate on it, and it rapidly vaporizes, and they inhale it through the what looks a lot like a bong. Oh, and then this is what they call earwax. This is honey, this is shatter, so kind of relates to what their consistency is. Excuse me. I showed you this picture before. This is a modern growing room, carefully controlled lighting, water, CO2 concentration. All of these plants are female. They have a very small number of plants that they actually allow to flower, and that's only done for sort of crossbreeding, trying to develop new strains. For the most part, they maintain a sort of a selection of mother plants that they then clip off sort of seedlings, I guess, to plant and grow, and all female that they then put in these growing rooms to produce the flower. When they're harvested, they are dried, really just hung up in a curing room to dry, and then trimmed. The bud flowers are the most valuable portion, and then the leaves closest to that, and then typically the other leaves further away are what is used for making concentrate, because they still have cannabinoids in them, and the process can strip them out, but they're not as desirable for smoking directly. This is an example of a CO2 extractor. It's more expensive, kind of a little more high tech. There's much simpler processes using butane. I don't know if any of you have heard of butane hash oil extraction, and people blowing their houses up by trying to do it. But it used to be kind of the most common method, is using butane. This is just one example of a use. This is filling cartridges for vape pens with oil, concentrated oil. So in Colorado, the average THC content in marijuana flower is 17%, and for concentrates, the average was 62%. And both of these are probably still climbing. I won't go into a lot of detail here because I'm sure there are some other things that you're hoping I get to, and I will. Is this of interest? I mean, a little bit? Okay, well, so I will move a little more quickly through it then. This is the active THC. These are metabolites that the hydroxy-THC is still psychoactive and lasts up to hours to even days. This can last for weeks in the system. So this is what is typically found in urine, and therefore a person can test positive in urine for many days or even weeks after use. CBD is very similar structure to THC, but does have different actions. So, for medical cannabis research, as mentioned, there are a wide or an extensive list of conditions that there's kind of a variety of statements out there about marijuana having benefit in. The list that have good scientific evidence is shorter. So the main resource that I want to tell you about is a report done by the National Academies of Science last year, the health effects of cannabis and cannabinoids, and it addressed both medical efficacy and potential health risks. So they found that there is conclusive or substantial evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids are effective for the treatment of pain in adults, reducing chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and improving patient-reported multiple sclerosis muscle spasticity. There's moderate evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids are effective for improving short-term sleep outcomes for a variety of sleep disturbance reasons. And then limited evidence for increasing appetite and decreasing weight loss. The studies that are available specifically look at HIV, but this should be a general benefit. That's improving clinician-measured multiple sclerosis spasticity, improving symptoms of Tourette's, anxiety symptoms, and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes?
I work a lot with disabled vets, and the PTSD disorder, whatever you want to call it, a lot of the guys that I talk to that are on really heavy-duty drugs for their symptoms say that by being able to use marijuana, it cuts down on the pharmaceuticals that they have to take in lieu of being able to use marijuana.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people say that for various conditions that they use marijuana and they use less of something else. So it's a tough sort of a balance to approach that space where there is a lot of anecdotal reports of various benefits, both in symptoms and conditions, as well as things like not needing other medications or feeling like there are less side effects than other medications, things like that. So there are a lot of people who say that they've had these benefits, and then kind of on the further extreme of looking for solid scientific evidence from trials that have comparison groups, et cetera, which is much more lacking. So where in that spectrum you choose to rely on and make your decision is going to vary for each individual and maybe their physician if they're working together on that. Yes?
Does limited evidence mean no clinical trial evidence, just anecdotal, or what does that?
Oh,
mean some evidence?
that's a good question, yes. Excuse me. So limited evidence means at least observational studies with a comparison group where there was evidence of some benefit for those using the cannabinoids. Yes.
The problem with marijuana is you can't do that much research on it. But I mean, the federal laws, it's been a controlled one substance. It still is for the most part.
Right.
So people can't do research, and hopefully, in Colorado you can. I know in Philadelphia, Jefferson and Temple are going to start doing some research. I'm not sure where they're getting their dollars from, because you can't use federal dollars to do this research, because it's still a controlled one substance. So,
Yep.
I mean, I think when I look at this, because I've been more involved, like more interested, like no one's doing the research, so that's where a lot of the limited evidence is, because it's not like you want to do a research on a cholesterol lowering drug or something. I mean, are things changing? Can you spend federal dollars in Colorado on medical marijuana research?
No.
Nah.
Well, yeah, not on sort of plant-derived marijuana. So first point I think I'll make is that yes, research is difficult in the United States, but there's research in a lot of other countries occurring. In particular, Israel has been very big in cannabis research over the years, and all of these things don't rely only on U.S. research, so they look at any available research. Excuse me. There are sort of derived products, like dronabinol, for example, that are either pure THC or pure CBD, or one that's a 50-50 mix, that it is much easier for those to have trials, kind of through the standard FDA process. So that has been one source of some research for different conditions. And then as far as actual plant-based research, there is one federally authorized source of marijuana for research. It's grown at a lab or at a facility in Mississippi, and any researchers who get federal approval have to use that marijuana. That's received a lot of criticism because it doesn't represent the marijuana that's currently available. It's much lower concentration. It may be, I don't know, it's had a lot of criticism. So there's certainly limitation there. Observational studies are a reasonable source of information, however, and some of these statements are based on observational studies where you're taking people who on their own have decided to use marijuana or have not, and then you're looking at sort of whatever outcome you're interested in. So there is a reasonable body of research to look at, but it could certainly be much better, and we hope that it is improving. Yeah. And then, of course, there are also preclinical trials, in animals or in vitro models. So, speaking of which, excuse me. So, their report found insufficient evidence to support or refute the conclusion that cannabinoids are an effective treatment for cancers. Now, as described with the limited, this is based on, are there observational studies in humans for effects on these? And for cancer, there are not. But their report says, however, the signal from preclinical literature suggests that clinical research with cannabinoids needs to be conducted. And they specifically referenced one large review. It was focused on gliomas specifically, which is a type of nerve cell tumor. But they found multiple animal studies showing reduction in tumor size, anti-angiogenic effects, which is blocking the development of new blood cells to feed the tumor, and then anti-metastatic effects, blocking the spread. Excuse me.
Inject this directly, or, I mean, how would this be done? I mean, do you want it to go into your digestive system by ingesting it? I mean, if it were to work with humans, how would it be taken or done or injected, or how are they thinking this might happen? 'Cause this is down our alley right here.
Right, right.
So, but
Yep.
by, smoking,
Mhm.
I mean, how do you get this into your system to potentially do this is what I'm trying to ask.
Yep, yep. Well, so with any type of treatment, getting it to the location that you want is an important issue. Cancers generally have good blood flow, and therefore any systemic medicine or exposure would get there pretty well. So if cannabis is effective for cancer, then any type of systemic intake should get it where it needs to be. Does that answer your question?
So systemic is smoking
Right, anything. So smoking, eating, it all gets into the bloodstream.
into the blood.
I think we're approaching time, so let me jump ahead to just very quickly some of the potential health risks. So smoking in general, I mean, you kind of expressed how I think about smoking cannabis. Yes,
We want to smoke.
exactly. So and I think that other methods are probably better than smoking. So same cancer-causing chemicals as in tobacco smoke. They're associated with premalignant lesions. There is mixed evidence in terms of lung cancer with long-term cannabis smoking, pneumothorax, and then limited evidence that after 1 month, frequent cannabis users who switched to vaporizing had fewer respiratory symptoms and improved pulmonary function. There's been some limited evidence of increased risk of myocardial infarction or, in younger people, stroke with cannabis use. Cannabis does have cardiovascular effects. It increases heart rate, and it can, more often it reduces blood pressure. Sometimes it can increase blood pressure, but it's very likely that if these effects are real and we start getting more evidence on them, that they would be related to individuals who have other risk factors for heart attack or stroke. And then, this exposure can perhaps tip that over the edge. Driving, not surprising. If you drive under the influence, increased impairment and crash risk. And using cannabis and alcohol together increases that risk more.
So are they growing cannabis with pesticides? Is it, I mean, can you ever get, I mean, that to me just defeats the purpose. Because if you're testing for pesticides too, that's, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there is some of both. There are growers who very specifically aim to grow without using any type of pesticide. I think the bigger sort of industrial types of locations, they have so much at stake that they do use pesticides. Now, excuse me, for things like the concentrates, those pesticides should, for the most part, be removed through the process. And that's why we want to test. Yes, there have been some challenges, but all states are working on improving pesticide testing. One quick thing, in inhaled marijuana, peaks in the bloodstream and its effects are much more quickly felt than ingested. So it can take up to 4 hours to feel the full effects of ingested marijuana. So we caution people to sort of start low, go slow, try small doses, see how it affects you before you figure out what amounts are right for you. There is some evidence of cannabis drug interactions. This is a list of the medications that we found some evidence for. It's likely that there are potential interactions beyond this list. There hasn't been a lot of research done on it. It's an important area, of course. And I would suggest, I think, talking with a doctor or perhaps trying to research online any particular drugs that if a person is using cannabis, other drugs to see if there's any known interactions.